Today is June 4th, 2010. I'm Don Carson at the Warhawk Air Museum in Nampa, Idaho. I will be interviewing Gay Massie for our Veterans History Project in partnership with the Library of Congress. The camera operator today is Allie Hill. Welcome, Gay. Would you please give us your full name, address, and birth date?
My full name is Gay Emily McMichael Massie. My maiden name was Morrish, M-O-R-R-I-S-H. My first married name was, during my war period, was McMichael, and my present name is Massie.
Okay.
And my address today is 8115 West Beckton, B-E-C-K-T-O-N, Lane, in Garden City, Idaho, 83714.
Okay. And your birth date?
I was born on January 3rd, 1937.
Okay. Now, branch of service and years served, perhaps?
Well, the branch of service I was in was the U.S. Navy, and I was reserve, and I was part of the Navy Nurse Corps.
And you, when did you go into service?
I went in December of 1959 while I was still a student.
And then when did you, were you discharged?
I was discharged December of 62.
Very good. Well, we want to welcome you and enjoy listening to your story. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, Gay, it's a pleasure to have you here today, and it sounds like you had an interesting career. So let's kind of start out. Where did you were born in St. Louis, Missouri?
Yes.
Now,
And we lived there for 6 years, but that was during the war, and my father was too young for the First World War, too old for the Second World War, but he was asked to go to Washington, D.C. and serve on the, oh crumb, I can't remember the name of it now, Office of Price Administration. And he was there for 3 years. So my mother remained in St. Louis and took care of my grandmother, who was quite sick, and she had me. And then in 42 my sister was born, and he was relieved of his duty, and so he decided to go to New York to work, and he got a good job there with Jacqueline Cochran.
I see.
You know, the Xavier-trix during the
Right.
Second World War, who ran all the airplanes going across the nation. And after the war, she married Floyd Oldham, who was a very wealthy real estate man in New York, and she started a beauty business, and my dad was her cosmetic chemist in New York. So we had that. I'd never met her, but I learned a lot about her. We moved to New Jersey at that point, and my dad worked in and out of New York. And my sister was about 6 years younger than me.
So now you were 6 years younger than you, so you were in school probably at that time then.
I had started first grade, in 42.
Now how much school did you get in New Jersey? How many years did you attend there?
Actually, I stayed in New Jersey till I graduated from high school at 18 at Summit, New Jersey.
I see.
And we had a neighbor who was a very fine doctor, and he encouraged me to go to Cornell University in New York City at the medical college. But they needed 2 years of pre-nursing, they used to call it. So then I took that at Hood College in Frederick, Maryland, and then transferred up to the nursing school. So it was a total of a 5-year program, including 4 months in the Visiting Nurse Service of New York when we got our public health degree. That was very rare in those days.
So you stayed there and went right to school right there. Now, did you have any contact with the military at this time, or?
No, I really didn't. I do remember my dad saying many times that he was really sorry that he was never able to serve, because he was about 10, I believe, in the First World War. But by the Second World War, he was closer to 32 or 33, and he had a wife and 2 children, and they weren't taking men his age then. And then they did assign him to Washington, D.C. So this made him feel better because he could do something for the war effort.
Now, you're probably pretty young, so you probably don't have many recollections of the attack on Pearl Harbor, I would suppose.
No, I really don't. In 42, I would have been about 5, maybe 6. But you know, we didn't have television then. Just turned the radio on rare occasions. So it was about 53 or 54 before televisions were getting more readily available to the general public. And my parents got one in 53, I think. So I remember the first days of the Today Show and Dave Garroway and all of that.
Now, you're still pretty young, but do you have any recollections? Obviously, you had some connection if your dad was working in Washington on the administration end. But did the World War II have any particular stories or recollections for you?
Well, I do remember collecting cans, kind of recycling them, as we know now. I remember that sometimes food was very tight. Every August we went down to Southern Maryland to see my aunt and uncle, and he was not called to the war because he grew tobacco. And so he had a tobacco farm down there. But my aunt always had extra sugar for quote-unquote canning. But then I found out she was putting 4 teaspoons of sugar in her coffee and getting away with it. She never canned a thing that I know of. And they also had a lot of trouble with butter. We used to get a plastic pocket that was solid, and there was it was kind of pale yellowish. And in the center there was big red dot, and that was the dye. And you would massage this by the hour, and that was your butter. I don't know how they maybe it was margarine then, I don't know, but I remember that they had to have the color in the butter because people didn't want white butter.
Well, they wanted to make sure you could know you were getting butter or margarine, but the color you could add then to make it look like butter.
Right, so right. And of course, she had a big kitchen garden, and we would share with his family was huge. They had about 8 children in the family, and the other families had gardens too, but we would share back and forth melons, wonderful Concord grapes, and a big arbor, and of course a big kitchen garden, corn. And she always had chickens running around the yard. And I remember on Sunday they would kill 4 chickens and they'd cut their heads off, and then the chickens would run around the yard so all the blood would spurt out of their neck, and then they would have white meat.
That sounds like a standard Sunday dinner. It sounded like that rural living was as good there as it was on the west side of the country.
Well, for the month of August, for about 12 years or so, I knew something other than city life.
Okay. Now, you said that while you were still in school at Cornell, nursing school, said the Navy came around doing a little recruiting thing. And that's your first contact?
Yes, and I was really excited because I thought, well, maybe this would be something I could do. You know, I'd be an officer as a nurse. We all had to have a bachelor's degree, and I remember when I first signed my papers, they said, if you fail school, you will be a Corps wave. And I was convinced that I better not fail in school. So, of course, I graduated that next June, and I was sworn in at number 1 Broadway, where they had some kind of military offices. And I have a picture, but I just could not find it, where they swore me in.
And this was you said 19?
In July of 60. No, wait a minute, 60, yeah, July of 60. I graduated in June of 60, after 5 years of education.
Okay. So you give you any time, or did you immediately ship off for duty?
I think I may have had a few days to a week, but I was pretty much on my way to Newport, Rhode Island, where they put us through 2 months of officer training. And after 5 years and just dying to be a nurse and so excited about getting into my career, they made me sit through all these classes on UCMJ and identifying ships, aircrafts, and weapons, and learning to put on my makeup properly, and marching in my uniforms and going through calisthenics, and then we had survival classes in the swimming pool, and I was really frustrated, but I had a wonderful time. At that time, Newport, Rhode Island had the most beautiful officers club, and every Friday night they would have a small dinghy boat filled with ice, and then filled with shrimp or fish or crab, and of course in New England we got lots of lobster. It was just wonderful.
So this is about a 2-month training there.
Too much, you know, whatever you have to do to become an officer. And then, when I got out to Great Lakes, they put me another 30 days through training to know how a Navy nurse has to do the paperwork at the hospital and all the government regulations and rules. And I thought, I'll never be able to be a nurse. And finally I started, and the first thing I heard was, here we were in these long white barracks buildings. We had 25 men in beds on one side of the ward and 25 on the other side of the ward. These were World War II wooden buildings, and they were drafty, they were cold. They had polished the floor so many times that the floor was just worn through. And they had built a brand new, I believe it was a 10-story hospital, about 1,200 beds, and it was a beautiful brand new hospital. And they didn't get it finished until around Christmas. So the 1st of January, we were pushing steel beds down the roads in the ice and the snow, and some of the serious patients went by ambulance just, you know, a couple of 100 yards to the new entrance. And I had busloads of people in Navy buses who were not that ill that could ride in a bus. And because I was the junior officer, they gave me 3 wards in a day, in 3 days. And I was the moving nurse. And again, I felt very frustrated because trying to get medicines to the patients on time and all of that was just a big mess. But then we got upstairs, one of the upper floors, and that was the medical ward where I worked. And we were very lucky because then we had 12 beds down in a row on each side, and then we had this a cement and tile wall kind of that was just about shoulder level, and then on the other side you had another row of 25 beds facing each other. There was simply no privacy. You know, we fuss so much about privacy, and that was emphasized in my basic program, but they didn't have any curtains to go around the beds, or even the 3, I remember for a while we had some metal frames, and they had 3 panels, and you would put that around the bed if you were doing something that the patient should have had some privacy.
Yeah, the military has not been very big on worrying about those small details. Let's take. Okay. This picture we have here, you say was a student picture of you?
Yes. I was at the New York Hospital, which was part of the Cornell University Medical Center there, and our uniforms were blue plaid from Scotland, and we had white bibs and a white skirt. And we had the plain wing cap, which was our student cap. And that's what I wore for the 3 years I was in the hospital. We had classes with the medical students, and we were one of the 5 schools in the whole nation that allowed cadavers in our basic program. we had 4 cadavers. We had about 300 students in the School of Nursing. And we had a senior medical student who did all the dissection, and then we would come in for our class, and he would show us the arm and all the muscles and tendons and nerves in the arm or whatever part of the body we were studying.
I see.
But the school was 115 years old about 20 years ago when it finally closed. It was the second oldest nursing school in the nation, next to Bellevue.
I'll be darned. Okay, now the next picture would be, is that your graduation picture from nursing school?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and we had a nursing cap that was a little poof with little ruffles around the bottom and kind of a crown that came over the top. It was a little batiste, and it had been worn for over 100 years. And they had our uniforms specially tailored to us, and they had long sleeves with a little cuff and a series of buttons. Then they had the buttons down the front, and then they offset the buttons on the skirt because it was not feminine to have buttons straight down the front of your skirt. And that was about mid-calf level.
Okay, now this next picture is going to be in your dress blues,
Yes, sir.
and you're in the military now.
Yes, and that was the winter of 60 to 61. And when we had to go to the O Club or when there was some special ceremony, we would wear our dress blues, and so that was a picture of me. And I was probably an ensign in that picture.
Probably an ensign there, huh? Okay, we have one more here. This is a sketch, and you said there's a story attached to that.
Yes, sir. When we were walking down the wards, we would take one overbed table and pile it with metal charts, and I would go with the doctor, and he would visit each patient at their bedside, examine their wound or talk to them about their condition or whatever it was that had happened to them. And I came up to this bed, and this young man, his name signed on there as Mick Vicker, and I have never seen him since. I don't know where he is now, but he did this little brown chalk picture of me, and I was absolutely thrilled, and it's been one of my prized possessions all my life.
I can imagine. Interesting. Well, tell us a little bit more about some of your experiences. You say you had a few outbreaks of different diseases over the years?
Well, you may know that Great Lakes has a lot of wind and a lot of bad weather in the winter. Lots of ice and cold and sleet. It's one of the most miserable places I've ever lived. The wind off Lake Michigan was continuous. And so we had a tremendous outbreak of pneumonia that winter, right after we moved into this new building. And they decided to do an experiment, and half of the ward of 100 were to get just aspirin and cough syrup. They all had pneumonia on x-ray. The other half got penicillin shots. Were still pretty new. They weren't sure that the penicillin would really work. And when we finished that experiment after about 2 weeks and the men were getting better, we found out that the group that had been had bed rest and had lots of extra rest at night and were told to just sleep it out and take the aspirin and the cough syrup, they did much better than the men with just the penicillin shots, because they were up and running around and going to the canteen and, you know, as well as they could. Of course, they were really sick, and a lot of them did sleep, but it was interesting to me that just the simple approach to it proved to be still a good method to get over pneumonia.
Right.
But in that, I must add another story.
Okay.
One of the things we don't even think about nowadays, but was very sensitive issue then, when I was talking to you about privacy at the bedside, of course, I had a number of corpsmen working for me, and I was the charge nurse. Over 100 patients, and the corpsmen were trained to give medicines, and they did the daily care, giving the men baths that were bedbound or helping them walk if they had trouble after surgery and that kind of thing. But one thing is that I was never allowed to do anything to a man, because at that time women were not allowed to catheterize a man. Any possibility that there might be something that was very private to be done, even though I was taught from the beginning that you take care of all patients and you give all patients the same loving professional care that you have to, I was not allowed very much to do anything personal with the male patients at that point. However, we had a day when we had to give 50 penicillin shots, and we only had 2 corpsmen. So I said, nonsense. I can give shots as well as anybody else. In fact, they said I was the best shot giver they had ever given. But they had to turn over on their tummies and bare their buttocks. And they were so embarrassed. It was just terribly embarrassing. Not like young people today. Well, I was involved in 3 court-martials, and the first one was related to this. Because the corpsman had 100 patients to take care of, and there were just 2 of them, and of course I had a lot of paperwork, but I had to evaluate them, I had to do physicals on them, and I had to do a lot of other things. Plus, I was a part-time trainer, because they went to the core school there at Great Lakes, but then they had to come on the ward. And at that point, we had to teach them any of the specialty items. Like if it was a surgical patient and it was an appendectomy or something like that, we had to talk to them about how to do a dressing change. And when I was on the urology ward, we had to talk to them about taking care of male patients in that specialty, because they had just been given a general education, pretty much what LPNs get today, but not as detailed as that. And but anytime they went into a specialty ward, then they would learn that specialty. Well, these 2 corpsmen were really stressed out with all these really sick patients. So one corpsman, who was a senior corpsman, decided to train a brand new patient who was getting well how to pour the cough syrup in the little cups and how to measure out the 2 tablets of aspirin, I think it was, and some other minor things. But they were medication, and that was illegal. And so I warned him, and he continued to do it, so then I had to put him up for court-martial. So it was a very bad thing. I was very nervous about it, but in my career, I had 2 other court-martials that I was involved in. The second one was a lieutenant commander who refused to put his gooseneck lamp off at 10 p.m. And I had medicated a second patient, and the officers always were in 2-patient rooms. They didn't have the open wards as the enlisted men did. And this man was insisting that he wanted to finish his book that night. And I said, no, lights out are at 10 o'clock. And he says, well, I'm a lieutenant commander. I said, well, I'm sorry, but the nurses here, no matter what their rank is, we outrank you as far as your medical care. And I'm to remind you that I have just medicated the second patient who's going to surgery tomorrow. You've got to turn your light out. He wouldn't. So I called my supervisor and I let her know that there was this man up there, and he would not turn off his light. And in about 45 minutes, I smelled smoke, and I went down there, and his gooseneck lamp had fallen on the pillow. He had fallen asleep, and the room was filled with smoke, and we had to call an emergency fire alarm, and we had to evacuate the patients, and he was court-martialed for that. Now, the third and last one that I was involved was, at one point we had a big surgical ward, And we had no intensive care unit at that time. When we moved into the new hospital, and when I had moved on to San Diego, then we opened the intensive care units. But prior to that, you would have the sickest of the sick patients right among all the 100 patients, and the 2 corpsmen and me would be responsible. Well, I was the night shift supervisor in a 400-bed building. This happened to be at San Diego. And I had a 400-bed building that was all surgical wards. And I was making my house rounds, and I had a young corpsman who was just about a year out of corps school, and he had a very large ward, I think 50 patients on that ward, but 3 of his patients were unconscious. They were in coma. They had had brain surgery. And this was a tremendous responsibility for a young corpsman. And I said, "Where is your other corpsman here?" He said, "Well, I'm not supposed to tell you." And I said, "You better tell me." He had gone into one of the private rooms, and he was sleeping off a drunk. And I immediately called my supervisor, and he was court-martialed also. So that's my story there. Now, while I was at the that base, I had dated a number of men, but in July of the year I had been there, just about a year, I was at the Oak Club one night, and I met my husband-to-be, and he was in the engineering college there for 3 years. For 3 months, he had graduated from engineering school, but he was going to be the engineering officer on a destroyer. And we dated from July through October, and were married in New Jersey at my parents' home there at our church there. And then we went out to San Diego, where he was aboard a destroyer. Since I had been at Great Lakes for 13 months, they said, if you're required to be in your first duty station 1 year, and then we can give you orders, but we will give you no proceed time, you have to take your own vacation time, and you have to pay for your move. Well, since I had just gotten married, I was going to drive with my husband out west, and I had plenty of vacation on the books, and he got a choice of 3 places to move his household goods from. So he chose my house and his house and Great Lakes, and so we were able to get everything moved to San Diego. But while I was there at Great Lakes, they found out that I needed to have my wisdom teeth removed. And they decided to put me under general anesthesia, and they took all 4 out at once. The problem was my friends were so sympathetic, they wanted to make me feel better. So they took me over to the officers club and gave me a big bourbon, which I wasn't used to drinking very much. It promptly dissolved all 4 clots in my mouth where the wisdom teeth had come out, and it had to be packed with dried powdered sulfa every day for 2 weeks until I got over the infection.
That wasn't quite as comforting as they had meant it to be then.
No. it was quite a thing to go through.
Okay, so now you've made the transition. You're on the West Coast now.
Yeah.
And how long were you out there then in San Diego?
Well, they also asked me to extend my time in the Navy. So I extended, I don't remember whether they wanted me to extend for a year, year and a half, 2 years, something like that. But I was there then until the fall of '62. And at that time, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and President Kennedy held every military person in they said, no one may leave the Navy. You have to stay in. Well, luckily it was only 30 days, and then I was almost dumped out on the next morning because the Bay of Pigs, of course, was over in 30 days. We were very lucky. But had it gone on, they could have kept me in for another year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever. But my husband went overseas on his destroyer, and he was protecting Quemoy and Matsu, which were 2 little islands off the coast of China. And the Chinese wanted them back like they'd like to have Taiwan back. And so they were shooting from the mainland on a regular basis. And for 9 months, his ship and many other of the destroyers went up and down between China and these 2 little islands to protect them.
So that now, was he still overseas then when you finally got discharged, or?
Yes, and I went to work for my godfather, who was an ear, nose, and throat surgeon in San Diego for 6 weeks. His nurse had broken her leg, so I worked in his office. And then I took a job with the San Diego Public Health Department, and they had a school up in Palomar Mountain where 6th grade children were sent all year long for 1 week each from all the different schools in the San Diego district. And we went up there, drove up there Monday morning, and we opened the school at noon, and we were there every day, every evening. The children stayed overnight. It was a camp situation. And then on Friday at noon, we all went back down to the valley.
Now, they have a special curriculum up in that
Yes.
school up there?
Primarily sciences, and they had English, and one night a week of that week they would look at the stars, and they would take walks out in the woods and learn about the trees, the flora and the fauna, and they would study animals. But you know, these San Diego children were in a warm climate all year round. So in the wintertime when they got up there, they thought they could take their shoes off and walk around with plastic bags on their feet. They didn't realize that the ice and snow was cold and wet.
They got some more education than they planned on.
Yes.
So you were right at
fun.
the observatory up there then on Palomar.
Yes, we were not actually on that property. We were in an adjacent area.
So
But it was a regular school system that was set up there, school classes and barracks buildings, and I had a 7-bed little clinic. And if someone got sick during the week or was homesick or something like that, then I had medical sheets on each student, and if they were diabetics, I had to watch them, or if they got sick or anything, I'd take them in there for the night.
What would the normal size be for a group like that?
Approximately 100 every week came up there.
Every week, so you had your own clientele right there on the spot, huh?
Right.
Interesting. Okay. So now you're being a school nurse. Where'd you go from there then?
Well, my husband was sent to Monterey, California, where he got his master's degree in operations research. For 2 years we were there, and I worked for 2 years in the San Diego Unified School District. I was the school nurse for 3 elementary schools and the high school. And there were, I think, 3 or 4 other elementary and junior high schools, and we had a couple of other nurses that covered that area. But I was very proud of the fact there that we had a lot of pregnant girls even then, and they immediately told them they had to get out of school. And this was, I just felt terrible about this. And I felt that education is where these young women with babies would have to go to get something they could do to earn a living and support their children. So the second year I was there, I found out there was a large classroom or conference room that was at the superintendent's office. It was just 2 blocks down toward the bay. And I set up for the public health nurses to come in for 1 hour and talk to them all about labor and delivery and baby care and immunizations and their own health during pregnancy and all that. And then we had 1 hour of English and 1 hour with history, which were required subjects for high school students. And so it was a very good program, And they kept it after I left because they wanted these girls to get their high school graduation, and I felt really excited about that program.
So you helped initiate that program there, at least there. Interesting. Okay, so we're Monterey, you say? And your husband moved out from there. Did he stayed there for a couple of years? Then what happened?
For 2 years, and graduated with his master's degree, and then he was sent back to the old Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. And he was there in the Navy. Well, we had been married about 6 or 7 years before I was able to have children. I just couldn't seem to get pregnant. And finally, as we were leaving Monterey, I was pregnant with my first child, and he was born in July. When we got back to the Washington, D.C. area, he was born at the Bethesda Naval Hospital. And they were overloaded with babies. I mean, they had beds out in the hallways. Just a time of year when everybody was having babies. And I said, look, I have a bachelor's degree in nursing. I was a Navy nurse. I know a lot about labor and delivery, and I've worked with babies. My mother is here with me. And so I convinced them that I could leave the hospital in 24 hours, and I brought my baby home, and he was perfectly healthy, and I had a good delivery, and it was just wonderful. 2 years later, I had my daughter, and they had hardly anybody there, and by that time they did know that I had been a Navy nurse, so they gave me a private room and special food and extra flowers, and but that time they had given me a spinal shot for an epidural for my delivery, and it had gone, you know, sometimes that medicine will go up to your brain and you get a terrible, terrible headache. It's just horrible. And so I was allowed to stay 7 days, which was not unusual in those days, but it was unusual for, you know, a woman to stay quite that long. But I had a wonderful black woman who was a nurse's aide there who was helping on the medical ward. And she gave me a sheet that was folded up, was about that thick, and she said, do you have a girdle? Well, you know, all women had to have girdles in those days. She said, you send your husband home, get that girdle and bring it in. And she says, I will put this sheet in the front of the girdle. And she said, your headache will go away. I said, oh, you got to be kidding. No, she says, it'll work. So she did, and it put so much pressure on my abdominal aorta, and it apparently was able to control this medicine from constantly going up to my brain and give me these headaches. And it just really worked.
One of those home remedies that worked really well, huh?
Yeah.
Super. So what year was your daughter born then?
She was born in 68. My son was born in 66. In 69, my husband turned to me on our 8th anniversary and he said, you know, I think I made a mistake. I never should have gotten married. He says, you've been a good wife and a good mother, but he says, I just don't think I want to be married anymore. I said, well, this is a strange time to tell me when we've got 2 little babies to take care of. He says, well, you can work. So he left. And I was just absolutely devastated. It took me 4 months to stop crying. It was very difficult. And I did get a lawyer right away because, you know, he also left the Navy at that time after a 14-year career. And he didn't work. And I don't know, it was just very strange. He was an only child. He was kind of selfish, and he wanted to really do his own thing. He'd take his paycheck and buy beautiful photography equipment, or he'd buy a sailboat, or he'd buy a sports car, and then he'd turn to me and say, well, you pay all the bills. You pay the telephone and the rent for the apartment and all of this. And so I don't know, I was just devastated. So we went to court, and I got a pendenti litem, which meant that I had custody of the 2 children, and he was supposed to pay me some child support, and it wasn't very much, and he didn't pay really on time. And so I had a real struggle that year. And after that, I met an older man who had been in the Second World War, and he and I had a lot in common, including we were both Episcopalians. And he married me, and I said, "Do you really want to bring up tiny children?" He said he had 2 older children who were already in their 20s, and he said he would. He wanted to marry me that badly. And so we did go back to court a number of times, and I got my divorce after a year or so, and then my second husband and I were married. And we were married 21 years when he died at 75 years old in 1991.
I see.
So I've been a widow almost 20 years now.
Oh, darn. No, you were still back in the
In
on the East
Virginia
Coast?
then. We were living in Virginia.
And how did you, what brought you west then?
Well, as I say, my husband was 20 years older than me. I was 34 and he was 54 when we were married. He worked for the government. He had worked in South Dakota for the Bureau of Indian Affairs at Eagle Butte, South Dakota after his career in engineering. He went with the government, and it was there that his wife died at 50 of lung cancer. And he knew that when the Indian princesses were looking pretty handsome, he'd better move back to civilization. And so he heard that there were more women than men in the Washington area.
I see. And so
Or was it the other way around? There was more men in the government than there were women living there. Anyway, he felt that was the place to go. He interviewed in a number of government agencies and finally worked for the Agency for International Development at the State Department in the Family Planning Program. And they would receive requests from overseas countries who would say, "We're having a trouble with our population. We've got to control our population." And of course they didn't know anything about family planning at that point. And so my husband set up a number of different programs. The first one we went to almost on our honeymoon. We were married the end of December of 1970, December, we were married. And in March of 71, he said, "I've got to set up a regional conference for family planning among 4 countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkey, or Iran." And he said, "Do you have any choice which country I should set this up in?" And I said, "Well, when I was a student in New York, we used to have Friday night dances, and I'd meet quite a few students from New York University and from some of the other colleges in the city. And I met many Iranians, and I really loved those people. They were really well educated, wonderful culture behind them." I said, "How about if we set it up in Iran?" Well, that was when the Shah was in charge of Iran, and we had no idea what the Soviet was all about or how rigid his government was. But we set it up, and we had 4 days in Tehran and the Samaranis Hotel overlooking the American Embassy. I woke up one morning and saw the American flag flying. That's the first time I'd really gone overseas, and I was just delightful for me to see the embassy there. And then after 4 days, we went down to Isfahan, 200 miles south, and we set up the conference there for 125 people. And then after we were finished there, we came back to Tehran for a few days and then flew back to the United States.
Okay, you were still operating out of the East Coast or the West Coast? Virginia.
We were in Virginia 12 years. My husband was approaching his retirement, and he decided to take an early retirement at 62 after 18 years in the government. And we looked all of the states: Arkansas, Florida, Arizona, Texas, and he had some Mormon friends who were living in Idaho, and they said it's really a beautiful state, and he should look there to come out. So he went to Moscow, and he got us an apartment. And I was recruited. He took me out for a week vacation in the end of May or so, and I was recruited to teach nursing at Lewis Clark State College for 2 years. And we had the financial exigency in the state of Idaho, and so they let 17 faculty go, and I did not have a master's degree, so I was one of the ones that was let go. And subsequently, I got a master's degree in nursing.
I see. And that's how you came to Idaho then, huh?
Yes.
So, okay.
Then he decided that he wanted to go to a smaller town than Lewiston. And I also got a very good job running a public health agency out of Ontario, Oregon. And it was working on both sides of the border. We lived in Payette. And I felt like I had fallen off the edge of the earth. There were 5,000 people in the town, and I had lived in Washington, D.C., New York, Los Angeles, San Diego, and all these big cities. And I really wanted a town where there was a university, where they had opera and ballet and plays and museums, and where I had a good chance for my daughter to get a good education.
So that you left the west side of the state and came back to
Boise in '83, and I worked for the Rand Corporation for 3 years doing a research project in nursing homes to see if nurse practitioners were a great advantage in nursing homes where doctors could not get out to nursing homes on a regular basis, and they could catch things early like a bladder infection and treat them at the nursing home rather than running them into the hospital emergency room and building up such an expense there. And I did a lot of research with the Rand Corporation, and unfortunately it was so close that they couldn't tell for sure. They had a group of nursing homes with no nurse practitioners. Doctors were just on call, and then there was a group that where nurse practitioners did the basic histories and physicals and the routine urine tests, blood tests, anything like that, day by day in the nursing home. But it was never proven conclusively that they were an advantage, but I think they're still being used in a lot of nursing homes.
You bet. Good. So you did you have any career here in the Boise area, or did just
Yes.
Or did
I worked traveling a fair amount with the Rand Corporation. My husband was retired then. My daughter was at Boise High School, and so I did travel 30 days and then come back for a couple of months and then go out for a week or something, and did all that research. And all this time I was applying to the VA hospital here in Boise for a job. And they kept having times when they couldn't hire anybody. They would have a hiring freeze. So it took me almost a year and a half, and I had been very active in the Idaho Nurses Association, and I had met a lot of nurses across the state from Lewiston and Payette and Pocatello. I went out there for conventions and in Boise here. And I met a lady who was the assistant chief nurse up at the VA, and I had worked with her on some nurses association projects. And she said, "Gay, aren't you a veteran?" And I said, "I am." And she said, "Well, do you know you have veterans points to get a job at the VA hospital?" I said, "I've been trying to get on the staff there for some time, but I just can't seem to get on the staff because they have these hiring freezes." She says, I'll make sure you get on the staff there," and she did.
Okay, so you went to work at the VA
VA
hospital?
hospital.
When
And
was
I
that
was
now?
there 10 years from 87 to 97.
I see.
And I basically worked in the nursing home care unit.
Mm-hmm.
And it was different than any outside nursing home because we took patients who had been in the hospital a few days, had a heart attack or a stroke, and were coming over to our care center
Mm-hmm.
for intensive physical therapy. Some of them had respiratory diseases and they had respiratory therapy. And then we would try to get them as near to their family in Idaho as possible if they were going to be chronically ill for a while and
Mhm.
need more nursing home care.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on a group of people, of 3 of us, who went out to various nursing homes inspecting them.
Mm-hmm.
After the state inspection, we went there because they would get a contract with the VA to go to Burley, where their family had lived for 4 generations or
Mhm.
something. Perhaps they were dying with cancer and they wanted to give them hospice care out there.
Mm-hmm.
We also had unconscious patients. We had patients who came in for 2 weeks of respite therapy.
Mm-hmm.
When their wives were taking care of them, they allowed them to come to the VA hospital, to the nursing home for 2 weeks
Mm-hmm.
every 4 months, so
Mhm.
that the wife could have a little rest
Mhm.
and visit family or
Mhm.
whatever. And subsequently, I worked on that 60-bed ward for most of the time, but we had a 10-bed unit within there that was all hospice.
Mm-hmm.
And I had taken some extra training in hospice, which was brand new then,
Mm-hmm.
out at Mercy Hospital in Nampa.
I see.
And I had used that when I was running the home health agency out in the Payette,
Mhm.
Ontario area. And so when I came to the VA, they asked me to be the charge nurse of those 10 beds that were set aside for hospice patients.
Mhm.
And I worked a lot of nights and evenings and weekends, and I always worked with the hospice patients.
Mm-hmm.
And I was given an award by the chaplain there
Mm-hmm.
because I worked so well with the patients and their families. And I felt it was a great gift because I'm a committed Christian, and
Mm-hmm.
I feel if you can bring that patient to the point where they accept their diagnosis and they accept the fact that they've done bad things in their lives, that they've sinned or whatever, and they can forgive themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then you bring the family in and have the family understand their disease, that they will never ever be normal, that they're going downhill, lung disease, heart disease, cancer, whatever they were dying
Mhm.
of. And then you have a reconciliation of the family with that patient.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a faith.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they believe in an afterlife, but they definitely have a faith.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what I call a beautiful death,
Mhm.
because they didn't need as much narcotics
Mm-hmm.
to control their pain completely.
Mm-hmm.
And they had what we called a good quality of life at that point and an easy death.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the veterans had no family, the veterans who couldn't forgive themselves, the veterans who had no faith. It was a much harder death for them. And we had to give them lots and lots of drugs in order to keep their pain under control.
Mm-hmm. So you retired then, and when did you finally retire?
In 97,
97?
I was retired on a disability because I had lifted so many patients, and I had injured my shoulders 3 times, my back 11 times,
Mm-hmm.
damage down my right leg from sciatic nerve damage and carpal tunnel surgery.
Mm-hmm. Well, you just worked yourself out of a job almost, huh?
It was a very physical job, and they kept saying, "Where are the orderlies?" Well, I said I hadn't seen any orderlies since I had been in New York in the 50s.
I'll be darned. You've been active in a lot of other causes along the way, though. You've been very interested in veterans affairs.
I have, and one thing I'd like to share is this shirt, which says IWVO, as my cap does. I can't remember which side. Is it this side? IWVO stands for Idaho Women Veterans Organization, and on the back here we have listed all the different veterans organizations. And so we accept anybody who has been a nurse, pardon me, anybody who has served as a woman in the military, no matter what war they're in, and whether they're officer or enlisted. And we have a very active group. We're getting some more young women in. And twice a year we take a homemade potluck dinner to the lady veterans who are in the state veterans home, and if any are able to come from the hospital, they're invited over. In August we have it outside on the patio, and in December we have it inside, and we bring either a ham or a turkey or something like that, and then everybody in the group brings dishes to pass to go with that. And we usually have a musical program, and at Christmas we give them each a little coupon so they can go to the PX and buy something for themselves.
I see. So, well, among other things, I noticed that you've made the cover of the Idaho Statesman one time.
I did.
This is back in 1998.
Yes.
Can we show this here to this, or do you need to look at it?
No,
I don't know
no.
if you can get this picture or not.
I've always been active in politics, and we had Congressman Chenoweth come in, Helen Chenoweth, and she was having a hearing about veterans' health care, and I was most interested in that. So I sat in the front row with my hat on, like I have now, with my lieutenant stripe and my core device for the oak leaf for the nurse. And they took a picture of me, and I'd never had my picture on the front of any paper, much less a Statesman.
Well, I got quite an article there. It says hearing focuses on vets' health care, and so you definitely were involved in those kind of things. What about other activities in your years?
My career?
Yeah.
Well, besides the Idaho Nurses Association, which I was active with for about 15 years, I also have been a lifelong member of the American Association of University Women. And after being in it in Virginia and also out here in Idaho, in Lewiston and Payette and Boise, I was awarded a pin for 30 years and a plaque that said that I was a named honoree for my work. I had been officer up and down the line in many different groups there, and that's in the Washington, D.C. at the headquarters for AAUW, which has university women around the world involved in that program too.
Okay. Well,
and of course politics I've been in.
We've gone through an education, a military career, and a lot of other career. Would you say that there was anything in your military experience or training that you think you brought forward in your life, and maybe you would like to, it would be worth relaying to maybe your children or other people about what you felt the value was, or what?
Well, I'm very proud of the time I served, and I felt it was a real, very important moment in my life to make that decision. And since I've been older, I've been able to use some of the veterans' benefits because I haven't had a lot of money in my retirement years. And to be able to use the Veterans Hospital for my routine care, my shots, my routine x-rays and blood work and female testing and all of that has just been a great plus for me. And I have encouraged many young people through the years to consider a career in the military. I also encouraged my son to go in the military. He served 4 years enlisted in the Navy.
I see.
And I went to Great Lakes for his graduation. And I got a shirt, and I didn't bring that. I love T-shirts. I collect T-shirts. And it says I'm the mother of a new graduated recruit or something to that effect. It was cute. And then my daughter got married, and she met a young fellow through our Episcopal church who lived in McCall, and then they both went to the University of Idaho, and they got married at the cathedral, the Episcopal Cathedral down here in Boise. And during his third year of college, he was from a family of 4, and I said, you know, you might consider a career in the Navy, because they will help you pay your way through school. And with 4, he had a twin sister, and then he had a brother 1 year younger and a sister 2 years younger, and 4 children in high school, and his father was superintendent of elementary school in McCall. So he, you know, they really needed extra money for college. So he decided to go into the Navy program up at University of Idaho in Moscow. And then he was sent to Pensacola. He just finished 20 years in the Navy.
20 years, huh?
And he's going into seminary to be an Episcopal minister in the fall.
Amazing, amazing. Well, like I said, was there anything that you stood out in your mind about your service and anything like that that you felt really became a guiding light for you or an aid to you in your...
Well, I felt that my personality was perfect for a very orderly career. And of course, being a nurse, you're pretty well organized anyway. But I just felt that that was such a wonderful way for young people to grow up, to go through a period in the service. I encouraged many students when I was in Monterey, California, to consider a career in the military. When the recruiters came to my school of nursing, 5 of us signed up with the Navy, and 1 was an Army brat, so she went in the Army. But out of our class of 88, we had 6 people, and a month ago we had our 50th reunion at Cornell University.
Oh, darn. Interesting.
Oh, I wanted to talk to you about this. Do we have time?
Just very briefly.
Okay. WIMSA is Women in Service, Military Service for America Monument. And it's right behind the curved front gate at Arlington Cemetery. And I am a charter member of that. And a couple of years ago, they celebrated their 10th anniversary, and I was there for that.
Congratulations. Well, one thing we want to make very positive is we want to say thank you for joining us here and sharing your story with us. But in particular, thank you for your service to our nation. We don't appreciate that enough to know. It means more than we just understand, and hearing your story helps us to better understand that. So we want to thank you for that. I guess, is there any last thoughts you have about your story that you'd like to include on this record?
Well, I always apologized through my life for having served in the military, but only being in the United States. If I had stayed 3 more months, I would have been caught up in Vietnam. I was ready to have a family, so I decided to leave the Navy at that point, and you couldn't be pregnant and be in service then. I was saying that one of the reasons that I have been so enthusiastic through my whole lifetime of encouraging young people to consider a career in the military is because I have seen so many young people in public health and in school nursing who are really on the edge of society. For one reason or another, they haven't had a very good childhood. They've struggled through school. They've been very poor. I've been in their homes and seen them and realized that there are a lot of almost an underclass in this country. And so I have talked to them about what a military career has done for me and how much I got from my wonderful experiences, and encouraged them to come into service where they have a guaranteed 3 meals a day. They have dental care, medical care. They have uniforms that give them a lot of self-confidence. They learn a trade, and they can earn money for a future education if they want to come back and get a college education, or another kind of training. And so this has been my theme all my life, that I have encouraged both men and women to consider that as a career.
Very good. Well, I tell you what, thank you again for your service and for your time today. What I'd like to do is maybe use this as kind of your final say. I don't know if we can get down to where we can show your discharge or not from the Navy. Thanks again, Gay. We appreciate it very much.
Well, it's my joy. You are real professionals doing this. I appreciate it, and I know you're volunteering your time. So it's pretty exciting for me.